This is a guy, folks, and if you're listening on audio, you can go to Mark Immelman and search for us on YouTube, and you can see Mark Bull. And I'm completely confused, Mark. I thought you were in Orlando. You've been now back in the UK. You're looking well as ever, and you are just blowing my hair back with your tour, with your social media feed. But we'll get to that in a minute. How are you been?
Don't look too close. There's a few greys there, Mark, since we spoke last time, and a few cracks. So it's wonderful what distance does.
Yeah. Well, look at you. You can see my, if you're looking, you can see my graying beard over here. I used to be black beard. Now I'm gray beard.
I deliberately get kind of, very, distant lighting, kind of a bit distracting in some ways. So it's, we're back in England currently. I mean, it's just circumstantial for us. We love the US. I mean, my wife, daughter, and I just had the best time there, but just because of the travel situation, because of the travel ban in place way back when, it was just becoming very, challenging to move around. So, it became not about me, it became about the three of us. So hence we met to England, and it's like being stuck between two loves. I love England, I love the US. So I was kind of happy being home, happy being there. So hopefully now travel all been well. It's getting easy. I was actually back in Orlando 2 weeks ago, which I love. So my plan is to certainly be there every month now, moving forwards.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you're one of the foremost in your field, in my opinion, because not only do you dive into the biomechanics and the movement of the body and the forces and the torques and all that sort of stuff, but you bring this real cerebral, sort of an ethereal thing to the stuff too, where you mix the holistic as well. And I'm going to put up a slide here in a minute for the folks to see. We're going to reference, but before we go there, I'm curious because I've always known this about you, but now it's becoming more and more evident that you are thinking more just beyond the data you get, and you delving into the human element of the swinger of the golf club. So talk a bit about your inspiration and why.
Yeah, I mean, massive. I mean, they're just values on screen. I mean, when you look at what it really is, it's just numbers. So it's just data, whether it's through, as you say, motion capture, through force plates, through launch models, regardless what it is. I kind of learned this a long time ago. And it's more about the story behind the information, what led the player that day to produce those values. And it really came from essentially messing up for a long time, with the honest answer. I messed up more times than I maybe got things right, in a very kind of humble way, where I kind of improved the values, but you could kind of define values improve in many different ways, but the players necessarily didn't always get better. So it really kind of developed into a very kind of big approach in mine. Often the data gets better, but the player gets worse, because the human was removed from that kind of learning, understanding. It became about the very clinical, as you say, very cerebral in some ways, the values on screen, without really understanding the player's movement history, their coaching history, just where they're at that day. I mean, you can get guys that come in the morning, then in the afternoon, produce two different sets of data.
Yeah.
Just because of where they're at that day, because of things like hydration, stress levels, that kind of stuff, or just, fatigue. So I very quickly learned that, the values in some ways are just representative of that, time. It's almost, I might meet someone today for the first time who's played at a high level for 20 years. That's a 20-year movement story to produce those values. So unless I really acknowledge and understand and appreciate what that player has done over those X amount of years, you can't really understand the data. So I learned literally through messing things up, improving the data, what I thought was a wonderful example, but there was no meaningful connection or relevance to the player in particular. It actually got worse. So it's something called de-skilling within movement. You can actually de-skill people through, for example, just improving values.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? You are like choirs of angels in my head right now with what you're talking about. And I want to put up the slide in a minute. But before we go there, I think along these lines, and I'd love your commentary, because I'm very holistic in my approach to instruction and game improvement. You know me. And you on Instagram put out this. Well, you've got these beautiful red slides that stand out, and it's coaching philosophies. And then I wanted to talk to you about there was one where you talked about the mistakes I've made, and I'm like, well, this is awfully honest. And I think there's so much that instructors can learn from listening to you, but I think that's for another time, because there's a lot of good stuff here. So you say, have we become more IQ dominant and less EQ aware? And it was a question, and I was like, you know what? I think we have. From my point of view, I could comfortably say I haven't. But as a rule, and all the instructors listening to this, the EQ, that emotional quotient, is so important. So what's your take on your question?
I mean, it really kind of goes back to that kind of previous question that we've got so information dominant in recent years. So I think people have kind of mistaken information for know-how. I mean, the last thing golf needs, Mark, is more information. We don't understand to a good enough detailed information we currently have.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we need more information until we really understand to that level of mastery in some ways? You know, what's been out there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, perhaps. So I think we've got so intellect-based. It's about, can you understand launch monitor? Can you understand motion capture? Can you understand force plate? Can you understand kinetics? That's all very good, that. But unless you can get that meaningful connection, once again, with the player as far as they see value, they see relevance as to, if we move you in that direction, if we look to, for example, make it back the data just momentarily, look to improve these values, could you move that way on the first tee of the Open Championship? Nah. So there's no meaningful connection to that. Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite questions I ask most players, regardless of their status, is, you know, if it was the club championship next weekend or the first tee at the Open, could you move that way next week? And if they don't go yes immediately, then there's no value to that for me.
Exactly. So
I think we've almost removed the human from the learning process. It's become about, can you quote complex theories? It's become about, do you understand to a level the physics of golf? But I kind of look at it that the more you reveal, actually reveals a lot about what you don't know. The more you say you do know, actually reveals then about what you don't know. Because if you knew those things, you wouldn't say that stuff.
That's so true.
So I kind of look at it that way. So I think we've just got, it's, you know, you get this young lady or young man come and see you for a session. It's just being very aware where they're at that day, why they see the planet the way they do at that moment in time. And you kind of look at it also that players and coaches aren't always in the same place at the same point in time. The coach might be slightly irritated, whatever reason, the player may be very chilled. So that's a conflict already, or vice versa, for example. Mm. And so I think we just need to slow down is the short answer. Really look at, you know, where's that player? Why have they really come to see us? You know, it goes back to my favorite question. So how can we help today? Assuming mechanicals. How can we help? So I think we've kind of moved away from that, it's been about, if you can go online and quote some research paper or quote some piece of physics. And I mean, if I ever said that to a player in a session, they'd probably walk away and leave me. That's no connection to most players. Most guys just want to get good at golf, regardless of their aspirations in their current position in golf. So I think we've kind of just moved away from that human connection. So it comes back, I think, to me about value. It's about adding value or not taking value away. And I think the more we've gone so far to the information approach in data, you know, complex theories, you know, robust rich science, which you need. You can't just be a complete pragmatist. You need that idealistic. So you need that the research background to kind of give it credibility. That's vitally important. But I think we just got to get back to, someone actually said this to me a while ago, and it made me think that you look at, say, you know, look at golf instruction as it currently is, you know, really since about the 70s onwards, mainstream coaches being more about information through videotapes and a lot more kind of books around about the 70s. But for 200 years before that, the environment provided the answer. Yeah. Most of what coaches and players kind of learned and acquired and developed skill was based on the environment. So it's only been a recent 50 years now, for example, we've been so heavily influenced by information. Perhaps because we're so deprived of it for 200 years, maybe, who knows? Yeah. But I think we just got to get that trade, that balance between just kind of, you know, reconnecting the human to the data again, understanding there's a human being there, is surrounded by fear, full of anxiety, ego, all these kind of things we have to navigate around. How do we reconnect them to create that reassurance? And a lot of it comes back to me, and I kind of learned this again through messing things up, that when you hear that people aren't coachable, it's often that they're not coachable, is that they weren't approachable. So how do we kind of make players approachable? Then if you can approach them, you can coach them. Yeah. The often reason why players appear not coachable is because they don't, to you, this is not as in you as a human, but more that us as consultants, it's how we approach them. So for me, it's we've just got to reconnect the human again, that we've got really away from that IQ and we've lost that emotional connection, I think, with the people we're very lucky to work with.
It's, you know what, you have probably, you know, made a lot of instructors watching this, and certainly golf students watching and listening to this very aware, you know, and it's been highlighted to me because now that, I'm now full-time in broadcast and stepped away from the college coaching thing. I have a bit more time. And so I'm churning out one or two more golf tips on social media and such. And I'm getting pretty positive feedback. And typically, a lot of the responses, great tip, easy to understand. Great tip, nice and simple. And I'm like, well, dang, I thought this was a pretty complex subject I was talking about. But maybe just my delivery is like, well, it's a bat and a ball eventually. And you got to go and try and propel this thing toward the target. So what you say is so well founded, because when it comes right down to it, it's about getting the ball in the hole.
Yeah, and it also comes back to what that person is comparing it against. If they've been around, years of complex information once again, but their coaching history is walking away fully confused and it needs so much thought and activity, given that person that one little, ear at the ball, big toe down, whatever it might be as an example, they go, oh, that's fantastic. Because it comes back to, look at our reference system in life is time, history. History is our reference system when we look at it. So if you look at, again, someone's coaching history as being wonderfully challenging and, they've had to walk away and sit in a dark room for 10 minutes after a session because of the approach they were exposed to. Having that little kind of 2-word piece of guidance on Instagram can be so liberating in some ways. So you can question the accuracy of the information. That's a different discussion. But how that player perceives it based on their past experience will be different for everybody. So it really connects into that previous question that most people or many people have been so, again, de-skilled through certain types of coaching. Now, having that kind of that 2-word point the shaft down, it doesn't matter what it is, can be such the freedom it can create internally can be hugely powerful.
So if people just go and get on your Instagram feed, they can find these coaching philosophies of yours. And I think a lot of them are genius because you find a beautiful way of posing questions, making statements, and almost connecting the cerebral with the doing of it all. And there's some over here that I just want to scroll through. And this was one slide you made for us, Mark. And I want to go through each of the points and just get your take. And the first point you make, which I think is just, it's really thought-provoking and just so true if I really spend time with it and mull over it. And it goes, ground reaction force is inherently influenced by how the hands move through space in response to our perception of movement and task. Now, again, ground reaction force, so the use of the ground, is influenced by how your hands move through space as you perceive the movement and the task. And this is so true that people tend to kind of lose the forest for the trees when they dive into something like ground reaction forces. So your take, please.
Yeah, I mean, massive. I think the key there, Mark, is the word reaction. That's the kind of clue. It's responding to what? That's what's called reaction force. So yeah, locally, it's obviously how the feet interact and leverage against the ground. But the basis of human movement is this, that how the hands move through space control how every single segment and joint moves and responds. So examples being, you can, for sure, influence and shift, say, the ground kinetics, the ground reaction force, but it doesn't always then migrate and influence through to influence how the hands then move through space. However, when you change how the hands move, it almost always influences ground reaction force. Okay. So other examples being how the spine moves is simply controlled by how the hands move. So almost have your listeners and viewers do is kind of reach up and touch the ceiling, look how the spine responds. Reach down and touch the floor, look how the spine responds. Yeah. Reach to the side. The spine is reacted and producing rotation in response to how the hands move through space. Now, the hands are obviously what connect the human to the golf club. So their perception, regardless really of someone's kind of how established and accomplished they may be, their perception of club delivery and the demands of the task will then really control how those hands interact with the handle. How then the feet leverage against the floor is then influenced by how the player perceives how the hands need to move the handle to best deliver the club in the way it needs to then produce the outcome that they're looking to produce.
I had a lesson earlier today, in fact, on the way here, right before I came to this conversation. And the guy wasn't moving well in his undercarriage, and it was sort of blocking the handle path a little bit. So we touched on how the pressure moved in the feet and to allow his hips to give him some space to move. And the shots didn't necessarily get better, but you could see now he had the mandate to move the handle better. And I said to him, I'm like, what you're doing in your undercarriage is an indirect influence on the golf shot. What you do with your hands is a direct influence. Then we made the adjustment in how the handle was controlled. All of a sudden, there was the power there was the control, and it was the embodiment of the point that you make here.
Yeah, it's not called ground priority force, it's called ground reaction force for a reason.
Okay, well, with that, we'll move to number 2. All right, get this one, folks. Again, if you go to YouTube and you watch this, you can see these slides. Long-term memory is the most influential system on how we move our golf swing. And in parentheses, you have kinematics. Again, long-term memory, most influential system on the golf swing. Please go.
Yeah, so every single, really, we look at movement as an example we make in life, or even when you're exposed to, say, new information, or you're attempting to refine and adapt skill, is referenced against memory. So when we look at why we move the way we do this, I mean, that the list of influences are, I mean, probably hundreds, even thousands. It's the why play. Such a complex area movement. It's the why players move the way they do. But everything we do in life is referenced against memory. So, for example, how if someone gives you feedback, I'd like you to move that way. For example, going back to your session you had earlier today, that will also stimulate a memory based on, well, that's not sure. I was always told I had to move this way. And when I've moved that way in the past, has been helpful. And I'll give you 2 examples of this that I remember sharing with a player a lot ago now. It actually was a very famous session in the end. I gave this feedback, which I thought was so dismissive and so unevocative in some ways. He went, when I did that, I actually won a major championship. So information inherently evokes a memory.
Okay.
Equally, so I've given feedback in the past to someone. I've gone, it's going to maybe look at how that shoulder moves in transition. They'll be like, absolutely not. When I've done that in the past, it really creates lots of pain for me. So again, it evokes a really bad response.
Okay.
So you look at even human suffering is attached to memory. All our pain in life is attached to how we chose to remember something. That's why there's that kind of very famous kind of adventure before dementia, which is why so many dementia sufferers are very happy because they've lost short-term memory. That's why they walk around pretty chilled, bless them, every day. Mm-hmm. And so everything we do is referenced against our memories of what happened or how we chose to remember something. So when you look at all the things, anatomy, ground reaction force, physiology, equipment, the environment, all these wonderful influences, it still comes back to our memories, is to those deep coded movements that we have within our system is still the biggest reason why we do what we do.
Wow, you spoke about fear and anxiety and happiness and sadness, all that sort of stuff too. That stuff and gets back to the holistic approach to golf and instruction.
Massively.
Oh, it's a big influence. Right. Point number 3, and this is 3 of 6. And again, folks, go to Mark's Instagram timeline. There are these things all over the place there. Thought-provoking. All right. Point number 3. We move and swing the way we do based on the mood we are in at that moment in time. Yeah. Okay, go. Because a bunch of players are going to be like, well, whatever, please go ahead.
I mean, again, it goes back to the idea of coachable and unapproachable again. You get some guys coming in, just life is all good. They're just in the most wonderful place. Everything's kind of where they'd like it to be, how they perceive they want it to be. They're just extremely coachable at that point in time. There could be some deep motivation around them. Some belief systems have been shifted hugely. There's real reason to improve. So they've got these wonderful stimulations around them, which just make them so coachable and so movable, so malleable in many ways. Then you get some days the same player comes in, they have an argument with their wife, they lost some money. Give you some pretty humorous kind of examples. Being stuck in traffic, delayed by an hour, really in a bad place in life. So they're seeing the planet very, very differently at that moment in time. They then revert back to old movements, dominant belief systems, become less receptive, more irritable, unapproachable in some ways. So you think there's the same person, it's the same information being given, it's the same task, they're just at a different place in space and time. So the mood that someone comes in to see you at when they come and see you, in essence, really controls how they move that day, how receptive they are that day, and really how much they aspire to actually improve that day.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. It truly is incredible. And if everyone's honest with themselves, they will realize that this is very real. And I mean, I've oftentimes joked with folks, you're a sought out instructor, 3D expert, biomechanics expert, but you bring this theory to stuff because I've said to folks on the tour, Europe, PGA Tour, wherever, here's the order. If folks, if the player isn't playing well, first to goes the caddy, next to goes the coach, then the agent starts getting on the chopping block, and then eventually the partner. Because if there's discord anywhere else, the player isn't going to do his best, or his or her best for that matter.
And what I know about certainly players at that stage, Mark, golf is never the issue. That when they're performing poorly, golf's not the problem. So I kind of explain it in many ways that not all movement problems are movement problems. Most things display as a movement problem, but are not always a movement problem. There's something somewhere which is then distracting and disturbing how they move, but they choose to see all movement problems as movement problems, which, as you and I know, aren't always the case.
Well, I've often said that I thought that was to ascribe a swing fix to a problem is intellectually lazy in a way, because there's so many more things at play, really. Oftentimes, I take players on the golf course, and you talk about mood. Well, situational analysis on the golf course to me is so important because they're just certain shots. I don't care how well the player is swinging; they creep into psyche, and that's that.
That's even the word fix in a fun way. I mean, the body's never broken, so it doesn't need fixing. So the body will always do the best it does with what it has available at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. So often why people revert back to poor movements and problematic moves, for example, it's because, again, at that place in time, that's what they had available through whatever reason. Could have been sat down for too long, could have been dehydrated, who knows? I mean, it's some examples. So again, the body will always do the best it has with what it has available.
Mm-hmm. All right, number 4. The shape of the human frame controls how the player both rotates and produces and moves to produce force. And along those lines, on a different post you had, it spoke of basically a player's width. The larger folks could shallow the club, if I understood it a little easier, where more slightly built folks, it wouldn't be as easy. So let's stay here with the rotate and producing force first, please.
Yeah, so they're called helical angles. So helix is, which is a Latin word for a spiral. So a helix is every single structure in the human body is spiral in design and shape. Okay. So they kind of keep this, because this is a very in-depth area, so we keep it really quite kind of light and fun for the viewers in this case. Mm-hmm. So when you have wider frame humans, big rib cages, big pelvis as an example, those tissues, so the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, the nerves, the fascia, the kind of, the soft tissue connection, they run across those segments on a much flatter, much more horizontal angle. Okay. Because they're going across wider, bigger segments. When you have a narrow human, those angles become much more vertical. They run up and down more again because the segments are much narrower. Mm-hmm. So when muscles expand and compress, which is really what human movement is, expansion and compression, how we expand or how we lengthen, we actually lengthen along those angles. Okay. So if you get a wide human being, when those muscles expand and say produce rotation in the backswing, as they lengthen along the angle, it will very much guide and control how those segments then move to both produce rotation and force. Equally so, you get a very narrow human being. As they expand and compress, they get pulled up and down more because they are, through design, they have much more vertical muscle attachment. So the shape of the human, in many ways, controls how they both rotate and produce certain intrinsic forces. So it really comes back again that we really can't understand rotation. We certainly can't understand force until we look at the frame of the human in front of us. So you mentioned shallow, and I'll give you a kind of a very bullet point definition. Yeah. Typically, not always, so there's always an exception, which is what makes it fun. But I kind of say that most people, exceptions are exceptional, which is why they became an exception. Typically, that's why they're exceptions, because they are exceptional. Mm-hmm. And you look at wider humans, because of how those muscles compress in transition, how does that then respond kinetically to how the club's being moved? They typically shallow the club slightly sooner in transition. Narrow humans, because of how they compress in the downswing, will shallow the club slightly later. So one thing, when you look at this kind of the shallowing or the change in pitch of the shaft, depending on what definition one wants to use, what they haven't acknowledged is the time it shallows at. Not everybody shallows at the same time. Yes. Why? One reason being the shape of the frame they're having to move around.
And a lot of folks on social media are talking about the shallowing and the rotation as a function of the club face situation. Now, getting back to your first point or second point or third, whatever it was, where the hands are moving, yeah, that certainly has some influence, but it's not the only influence. You can't be dogmatic about this.
I mean, 1 and 4 inherently connected. So you could almost kind of create some circular kind of discussions here that the first point around the reaction force and the kinetics that the club's both been exposed to and producing are still influenced by the shape of the human.
All right, folks. You can see why I call this one of the smartest human beings I know. All right. That's 4 of 6 quickly because I've kept you and I'm keeping you from getting your little girl to bed. Number 5, Mark Bull's coaching philosophies, and he's got plenty. How we stand in life and how we can walk can reveal very much about why players swing or move the way they do. Me, you should see. I look like a turtle, man, from years of golf instruction. My head's forward, my shoulders are internal. I'm a mess, and my golf swing exhibits exactly what you say.
I think I think gravity's winning, Mark. That's the reality of most humans. And it really goes back kind of 4 and 5 in some ways kind of thread together. Look, one of the most realistic ways to give it, again, a usable example of understanding why someone moves the way they do in transition, look at how they stand in life. Why? Mm-hmm. When we have those, as you said, those adaptive postures, those adaptive frames, we have inside of us kind of these compressive pulls that are creating these adaptations. Those tissues, those angles, once again, are being pulled and compressed into certain directions that create these adaptations that we see, as you say, forward head, the shoulders live in that internal position, examples big. When we move in transition, we then get exposed to tremendous amounts of force, external force. So when we get compressed in transition, through design, we'll deform and migrate towards our dominant posture.
All right.
So when we have those internal compressive forces, say for example, there's a big pull through that trail shoulder, the rib cage is compressed, it goes into that trail hip. When we really then place ourselves under huge amounts of force in transition, typically we'll get pulled along that kind of internal line. Examples being the shoulder goes forwards, the spine then starts to kind of move away from the target, the trail side elevates, the hand path goes behind them. A move you see amongst many players, certainly more recreational and occasional players. Why? Because those internal pulls within us, when we get exposed to lots of force in transition, we typically deform in the direction of those internal imbalances.
Tremendous stuff. You know what? And every point you make here, one thing I love about them is they're so thought-provoking, and for any instructor, any player, you could go spend some time and just mull over any one of these, any single one, and I find my mind just wandering all over the place, and I wonder what it must be like inside of your head, because it's got to be spinning all of the time.
Full of conflict every day, but in a good way. I'm always conflicted that in some ways, is the cure to disease in many ways.
Yeah.
That's my kind of internal conflict. Am I the problem? Most likely I am. So I'm kind of happy with that kind of that approach, though, in a fun way.
Well, I'd asked you earlier. I mean, you had that one post when I first reached out to you to try and align our schedules, where the post that you made was mistakes you had made. I was like, well, this is awfully honest. This is not very Twitter or Instagram, but I was curious as to why you would do something like that, or at least share it.
It goes back to being true to your values in life, and certainly one of my big values is kind of being can I look in the mirror and be happy? The man in the mirror in some ways, and I think we need to share more around what didn't help and what didn't work rather than what did work. It's like research in some ways. Understanding what doesn't help a player can actually be more helpful than what did help that one particular player. And so it comes back to many reasons. It's staggering how much abuse I received from that post. Some really unpleasant responses I received privately, which is disappointing, because whoever decided to send those messages clearly missed the point of the objective. This is me just saying, look, guys, look, I've looked at this stuff. It didn't help. I'm just trying to kind of share it with the wider community. And look, I've looked at these areas, really kind of explored them for the last year or so. And invariably, it's been a pretty unpleasant response through both the player's evolution and whatever you're looking at. And some people got really badly offended by that. So, it was a shame that they chose to see it that way, but I guess that says more about them than it does about me.
Yeah, well, sometimes the truth hurts. And I'll run your lines real fast. You see these 2 flags behind me if you're watching on YouTube. One of them, they're both Masters champions that I've coached, taught, worked with, instructed, consulted to, whatever you want to say. And one of them is Larry Myers, a very deep thinker, very spiritual man. And every lesson he's ever taken, every time he practices, he makes notes, a la Ben Hogan. And he still got them all. And so I asked him about this, and he said, Mark, all the stuff I've saved up, it might be wrong, but I know I must never go back there again. And
You're right.
and and that is sort of to galvanize your point. Okay, the final one of these six, they've all been great, also helpful, and this one's very simple. And I think this is more. This is can be ascribed to life and overall well-being, and not just the golf swing. And it's aspire to become more elastic and less plastic. Go.
I mean, it really threads in kind of point kind of 1, 4, and 5 there. That the basis of movement is elasticity. We are these elastic, viscoelastic properties that we are within the human movement. But as you said, accurately, a little while ago, that we're becoming more plastic. We live in these very fixed kind of postures. We're becoming so inactive these days, and so more people are now losing elasticity and becoming more plastic within their postures and their views and their values and their movements. So I think when you look at, say, just the basis of human movement is that wonderful elastic rotation. So wonderful examples like McIlroy's just been the most, outstanding elastic mover since whenever, probably since, probably back to his adolescent days.
Good, yeah.
And which is why he's such a sustainable, such a beautiful mover still. So really, I think most of us need to kind of, become less plastic, less fixed in every way. Movement evolution starts both inside and out. It's evolving through the brain as we evolve through the actual human frame as well. So it's becoming a much more elastic mover, much more adaptable thinker. One could certainly suggest that of all the adaptations and flexibility, if you wish to call it that, we need to have within movement, having a flexible brain is actually more important than having a flexible joint.
Yeah.
Having both is obviously is nirvana in many ways. So I think it's we've just got very plastic in life now, very fixed. We don't move as much. We get held in these kind of dominant postures. We've lost that elasticity of movement. So I think the more we can get back to being the 2-year-old again. And you mentioned my daughter. My daughter teaches me more about movement every day just by being herself than I ever kind of teach her.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, because they're wonderfully elastic at that age. So yeah, become less plastic, more elastic.
I learned about balance by watching both my girls learn to walk. And it occurred to me quickly enough that balance is more about counterbalance and the body remaining upright than anything else.
Yeah. But if you think about it, even standing still is still moving because the planet's moving. The planet's not still. So even standing still, you're still moving around that as the planet obviously is rotating. So we can never actually stand still in life.
Told you he was a deep thinker, people. Other podcasts. He's Mark Bull. Parting shot. Is there one?
Parting shot. I mean, wow. I mean, we've gone through some big kind of approaches there, and
how about you just share your Instagram handle on the website so folks can find more from you?
Yeah, kind of. It took a lot of thought. This Mark, it's Mark Bull 3D, so it took me hours to think of that one. But it's just kind of Mark Bull, my name, MARKBULL, number 3, letter D, and that's my kind of Instagram handle. Sorry, it's a lie. It's Ball 3D Academy. I do apologize.
Yeah,
I do apologize. It's Ball 3. I forgot that.
Hey,
and
people, not very often that I get to correct this smart guy over here. It's Ball 3, the number 3, D, the letter D.
Academy.
Yeah.
And I mean, just I'm into that. Just kind of be true to your values in life. That's my big thing. Just if I can go to bed at night and be happy, then it's all good.
You're the best. I love our conversations. I look forward to sharing this with the world. People need to listen and people need to reach out. You're doing great work, and I'm looking forward to connecting very soon in the future.
Well, we hope to be back in Orlando, certainly kind of very early January, and it's pretty much throughout kind of Jan, February, March. All being well, I'll be in the States. So, Mark, anytime I get to see you, it would be an absolute pleasure. So, thank you as always for the invitation.